Murder comes in so many ways. Killers have options.
When was your first murder? He said nasty things about me. He said so I chucked him under the tube.
When talking to police, a man called Kieran Kelly owns up to being a murderer. Some will one day claim he's killed 31 times. His favoured weapon, his bare hands and his strength. He pushes some victims onto the London rail tracks.
The very first murder that he admitted was under a tube.
Kieran Kelly was arrested and charged with the attempted murder of another man at Tooting Beck tube station in London.
And then he started to relay story after story after story.
Kelly operates in plain sight, camouflaged amongst the commuters or targeting the low-hanging fruit, those least able to look after themselves.
These were homeless people. These were people that had lost contact with people that cared about where they were. They were also vulnerable because a lot of them were addicted either to drink or to drugs.
The story of Kieran Kelly has become one of the most enigmatic and troubling criminal mysteries of our times. A twice convicted murderer who brazenly admitted to many more kills.
There's a big discrepancy between 31 and 2.
Over decades, London harboured an assassin, but was he a pusher on the underground? What went on inside the mind of a serial killer?
She fought like hell.
Serial killers have a desire to kill. They have a thirst to kill.
Travelling the underground is a means of getting from A to B, but not for all of us. For some, it's a place of warmth. A ticket to ride can offer shelter from the cold, a haven. But as some descended to their safe place, they could meet a man who, like them, was sleeping rough, a very territorial vagrant who could kill. This was his platform, his tube station. Ordinary commuters might come and go, but fellow seekers of shelter, like Kieran Kelly, should move away fast.
I think what's particularly distinctive about Kelly's victims is how vulnerable they were. These were homeless people.
From 1953 until the dawn of the 21st century, the Irish labourer Kieran Kelly chose the underground to occasionally attack people. But his photograph was not plastered as a warning to commuters. Police were not on the hunt for him. Remarkably, his deeds were unheard of.
This just wasn't a story that I had ever even heard, even a whisper about, something about an Irish killer in London that had killed, upwards of a dozen people and potentially more.
Some argue that the Kieran Kelly serial killer story has never been sensationalised in the media because of who he chose to kill. Fellow vagrants. The men and women often overlooked by Londoners going about their daily business.
Mind the gap, please.
And it's really sad because, you read these cases and you kind of think, oh, well, it was part of the homeless community. These are people that were born with no different hopes and dreams than any other baby.
Linda Papadopoulos has been on a journey of exploration as she tries to uncover what made Kieran Kelly tick and how many times he actually killed, to discover the truth of the Kieran Kelly mystery, one which begins back in his native Ireland, where his early life is crowded with complexity.
Or I went back to his home place. So I could use a parish record in where he's from. It's a small village called Rathdowney in County Laois. A couple of thousand people, very rural in the Irish Midlands, very quiet village.
A trip to Rathdowney serves only to deepen the mystery about Kelly. The apparently happy family were lifelong locals who disappeared overnight.
What we know about his family background is that it's relatively stable.
They left all of a sudden, which in itself was slightly unusual because the family had roots within that area, within that rural area of Ireland. They weren't a first-generation family living in that area. They had parents and grandparents who had grown up in that area.
He doesn't leave this small town in Ireland, to find his fortune. I think he's running away from something.
It was kind of noteworthy for people who lived in the area that the Kellys just left town all of a sudden.
Why had the Kelly family been so quick to leave? Was it because the still teenage Kieran had killed for the first time? A macabre discovery was to be made when others moved into the Kelly family home, and the man of the house began some DIY.
Digging his garden one day with his son, digging a trench to bring a water pipe from the house to the road, they hit bones and they dug a little bit further and they turned the sod and they found what they assumed were skeletal remains. Now they felt that it could have been a person. There was a wire noose around the neck. It lends itself to the theory, did Kieran Kelly, could he possibly have killed in Ireland as well as England? So it's just another point of intrigue that hangs on a Kelly story.
The Kellys moved to Dublin, where Kieran was no stranger to the local police. Something else emerges about him in devoutly Catholic Ireland. He seems to have done battle with his sexuality.
I think what he may very well have been running away from was the fact that he had this ambivalence around his sexuality, a sexuality that at that time would have been vilified.
Perhaps then his homosexuality is one of the causes of Kelly's decidedly antisocial behaviour.
His crime record or his rap sheet, runs as thick as a telephone book for petty offences. It's been a feature of the Kelly story, his sexuality and his homosexuality.
Not only was being gay frowned upon in society, it was still a criminal offence. Kelly's sexuality will become fundamental to understanding his methods, motivations, and his mind.
The idea that you have to repress your truth, right? Repress something as natural as breathing and eating, something as natural as looking in the mirror and knowing what you see is hugely detrimental, hugely detrimental. We know that this kind of repression can lead to things like depression and anxiety, and indeed a self-loathing or a loathing of one's community. And it may be that this is precisely what we're seeing in this case.
The policeman who interviewed Kieran Kelly and who was part of the team which would lay murder charges against him is former Met detective Ian Brown, someone who believes Kelly's fight with his sexuality is key to his story.
Tell me what it was like in 1953 for homosexuals.
Well, homosexuality was still a crime. There was gay bashing going on. Everything was hidden from a homosexual point of view. There weren't gay parades and gay pride, and people hadn't come out. So it was a totally different attitude from the public because they were criminals. So although people say, oh, it's homophobic, it wasn't. It was the fact that that is a criminal act. So you were brought up to think, well, that is a criminal act. It's the same as theft or other things.
Sure. So Kelly would have been brought up thinking there's something wrong with me, right? That this is not only not okay,
that he
I'm
wouldn't
bad.
Thinking that he would never admit to being homosexual, yeah.
In unravelling who Kelly may or may not have murdered, the start of his confirmed killings is 1983, when, already a heavy drinker, Kelly was a vagrant living rough in South London. That's when Detective Ian Brown came across him and discovered the ferocity of extreme vagrant-on-vagrant violence.
I was detective inspector at Clapham Police Station. The night before I met Kelly, there's an old tramp by the name of Boyd, who's a typical tramp, no trouble at all, but always drunk. And that night, the two young police officers went out onto Clapham Common, where they found Boyd comatose and it's raining and it's messy. Well, they didn't exactly do the right thing. They should have picked him up and taken him over to Brixton, but they didn't. They put him in a police van and took him to the police station. Boyd was put in a cell and passed out. The following day, at about midday, an old guy is up in Clapham High Street, sitting down, just watching the world go by, when he's approached by two tramps, one called McManus and one called Kieran Kelly.
Kelly and another street drinker called Paul McManus were on Clapham Common. There was a botched robbery of a guy called Walter Bell. Kelly twisted his arm around his back, pulled the ring off his little finger.
They basically rob him of a wedding ring and his watch. Very quickly, they're arrested, two vagrants, two tramps, taken to Clapham Police Station. The station sergeant has got 4 cells and he doesn't really want to contaminate all of them, so he thinks it's a good idea to put the two new tramps in the same cell as the drunken old one who's asleep on the floor.
When they got to the cell, William Boyd was there, another homeless street drinker, often picked up to the police and pretty well known. He was in the cell sleeping it off. Ian Brown, it was coming up to the end of the day. Ian Brown was getting ready to go home when he started to hear screaming coming from the corridors of the police station.
A young detective shouts, "Governor, Governor, quick, down the cells." So I go down to the cells, and there I see Boyd with a sergeant giving him the kiss of life. Lovely, dirty, smelly old tramp, and somebody's giving him the kiss of life. So I went over and felt his pulse, no pulse.
And when he looked into the corner, he seen a calm, cross-legged Kieran Kelly in his bare feet.
And I looked down and I noticed that round Boyd's neck is 2 long socks that have been knotted together, and he's been garroted.
So the officers that are there haul Kelly out of the cells, pull him into an adjoining cell, and pretty quickly he confesses to the murder of William Boyd. And within 24 hours, they have him in an interview room.
Ultimately, we get Kelly out and talk to him. It's obvious what he's done, and he's quite happy with it. Puts his hands up and says, "Yeah, well, the dirty old bugger was snoring, and he ain't going to snore no more." And it's just, that's it. So we've got a murder in the cells, we've got Kelly, end of story.
Except it wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. A drunk homeless man called William Boyd has been murdered in a police cell in Clapham, London. His assailant, Kieran Kelly, is proudly boasting about it. The detective, hearing his story, senses there may be more that Kelly would like to admit to. He was in a mood to reveal, rather than hide truths that he'd lived with for decades.
So I said, "All right, well, tell us the story then." I said, "When was your first murder?" He said, 1953. Coronation year.
Kelly was admitting to having begun murdering people 30 years ago.
So I came over with Christy Smith, which was his mate, from Ireland. He said, and he said nasty things about me. He said I was gay. He said, so I chucked him under the tube at Baker Street Tube Station. And then he started to relay story after story after story.
Did unsuspecting policeman Ian Brown have a serial killer on his hands? Kieran Kelly had confessed to murder in a police cell and then freely admitted to pushing a man to his death on the tracks at a London Underground tube station. What else would he admit to? The detective and the killer were playing a game, the investigator acting dumb, the murderer leading the interview. But how much of what Kieran Kelly is saying at the time is true?
So do you feel at this point that he's enjoying this, sort of sharing
yeah,
it with you?
it's bravado.
It's bravado. So
Yeah.
he's smarter than you. He's killed all these
Yeah.
people. Look how clever he is. So can I ask you? So you're hearing this. What's the dance? Explain to me, like what? Again, as a police officer, you're trying to kind of handle that fragile ego, get as much as you can. So how do you handle it? How do you kind of draw this information out?
Well, I'm highly delighted. I've got something different. It's not just a dead body in the cell, and suddenly you realise that you're onto something, but you don't know what it is.
Are you feeding the ego? Are you kind of bigging him up?
Completely feeding him, and telling him how clever he is and how's he managed to get away with this all these years, and the sergeant and I are just looking at each other and thinking, let him go, and so we keep telling him how wonderful he is, and he keeps giving us more and more and more.
Kelly soon volunteered another victim. He offered a name which meant nothing to Ian Brown: Hector Fisher.
Now, Ian Brown kind of went with the flow and just, played along and said, well, I don't know, you tell me. And Kieran Kelly said to him, you're talking about Fisher, aren't you? And Ian Brown, not having a clue who Fisher was, said, that's the one, and signalled to a station sergeant to go contact the police archive and find out who Hector Fisher was. And he came back with information on Fisher.
He suddenly turned round to me and he said, oh, I'm too clever for you, aren't I?
I'm too clever for you.
I said, oh, always, Kelly. He said, yeah, you didn't know it was robbery, did you? I said, no, I didn't. I said, which one are we talking about then, Kelly? He said, Fisher.
Ian Brown wasn't aware of a Hector Fisher. They picked Kieran Kelly out of the cells for strangling William Boyd. And next thing, they're in the middle of this rambling confession. And he throws out this name, Hector Fisher, who he said he killed in Clapham Common in 1975.
I said, well, tell us all about it then. He said, I'm too clever for you. He said, I robbed him. He had a lot of money. He said, but I left £20 in his pocket. I stabbed him. Oh, okay, Kelly.
Kieran Kelly told the police that he knew how much money was left on the body. This was the point that the prosecution made play of in court, was that only the killer could have known, how much money was left on Hector Fisher's body. And Kieran Kelly had told this to the police in Clapham Police Station in 1983.
So we then get the file out and we find that exactly £20 was found in the pocket when the pathologist went to the scene, and the wounds were as Kelly described it. So suddenly we've got Kelly putting his hands up to a murder that we
Never associated with him.
never associated with him.
What emerged from the police file was that Hector Fisher's murder had remained unsolved for 6 years, but there had been no public clamour for justice for an unsolved murder. The victims were off society's radar screen, the underclass on the underground. Kelly's reputation amongst the homeless community meant that he was actually interviewed about the murder.
Kieran Kelly was interviewed at the time, and nothing happened. So possibly in Kieran Kelly's mind, he had outsmarted the police, and the reason why they couldn't stick anything to him when they questioned him initially was because he'd left this sum of money on the body.
Fisher's murder was, according to Kelly, money motivated. But were things more complicated?
Yet what we hear time and time again are people either reporting that Kelly was gay or that he had a loathing for the gay community, possibly because of his own repressed feelings.
Or it could also have been a convenient excuse for Kieran Kelly to kill Hector Fisher. They went drinking together, they were sat on a park bench. Next thing, Hector Fisher makes an advance on Kieran Kelly. He repels this advance, repels it in the most brutal way. You know, he attacks him. I think there was upwards of 21 stab wounds and wounds from blunt force instrument and a deep wound on his chest as well. So, you know, there could have been some kind of sexual relationship, some kind of sexual arrangement between Kieran Kelly and Hector Fisher that led to Kieran Kelly attacking Hector Fisher in Clapham Common in July 1975. You know, that led to his death.
With such a brutal attack on Hector Fisher, why were police unable to find witnesses at the time of the crime? The answer helps explain why so much of the Kieran Kelly story remains unproved.
The biggest problem, of course, with this whole system is that Kelly is a vagrant. The whole of the vagrant community is a moving community.
And when I look down,
The Hector Fisher murder in 1975 had gone unsolved in part because the witnesses, homeless wanderers living on the very edge of society, had simply moved on. Another scenario which explains why Kelly was seldom found guilty of killing involved his claims that he had murdered a man called Morris Whaley. In that story, the truth was almost impossible to establish.
One of the ones that Kelly admitted to was a guy who he said he'd hit over the head with a brick and was found at the bottom of a set of stairs going down to a ground floor flat. And everything was right. But Kelly said he'd hit him over the head with a brick. Well, it had gone down as accidental death because he was a tramp who'd fallen down the stairs. And this was the biggest problem.
So there's a fear that, from your point of view, that he's just now at this point wanting to big himself so much that he's going to just pick on every death and say, no, that was me as well, and that was me. So there's going to be an overestimation, right?
Yeah, I mean, everything that Kelly now says has got to be investigated to see if the facts tie up. And there's, in actual fact, there was one that he told us he'd done, and he couldn't have done because he was in prison at the time. So he chucked in a few, and I don't think that anybody will ever know exactly how many murders Kelly committed.
One of the most frustrating, problematic things about piecing this together was the amount of lying that Kelly does. So we know he admits to murders that he couldn't possibly have done because he was in prison at the time that these were committed. So the question then becomes, what is he getting out of saying these things? Is he a fantasist? Is he getting some sort of, bravado? Is he feeling powerful by taunting the police and feeling that, they can't catch him, he's done more than he has? I think these are those niggles around us never really being able to have a clear understanding, not only of how many people Kelly killed, but indeed his state of mind when he was lying about performing those acts.
But police are confident that Kelly murdered many more than the two for whom he was convicted. For example, the case of Edward Toll. Ian Brown knew Kelly had known Toll. Now he wanted to know more.
You shouldn't hang his socks.
For some reason, and you never know why, you'd draw Kelly's file out, which in those days was all handwritten and everything was not on computer. So we have a look at Kelly's file.
And they have information on an acquittal from 1977 of a guy called Edward Toll, another homeless, street drinker, tramp, dosser.
Toll had been murdered, Kelly the only police suspect. He stood trial, but there was to be no conviction.
We see that he's been found not guilty of murder at the Old Bailey.
So he reasons that, okay, hey, he's after confessing to Boyd. Maybe now he's going to confess to the murder of Edward Toll in 1977, the one he was acquitted for. So he threw out a general question to kind of test Kelly and just said, okay, Kelly, why don't you tell me about all the other murders then?
So we looked that up, and the story is this, that Kelly sleeps in churchyards, on tombstones, and he's gone into Kennington churchyard.
What happens is that Kelly normally sleeps on this tombstone, and he goes there one night, and lo and behold, Edward Toll is in his place.
So he's not very impressed with that, and he has a rope round his, keeping his trousers up. So he goes over, takes the rope off.
He gets so upset that he garrots him. And he does this with other homeless people watching him.
As he walks away, one of the other old tramps says, "Oh, Kelly, you might have killed him." So Kelly goes back, puts the rope round again, does it again and says, "I effing well have now."
Now, at the time, these witnesses are taken in, they give statements, they explain what happened, and so Kelly's put in prison.
But this seemingly cut-and-dried case proved problematical for prosecutors and goes to the heart of why Kieran Kelly is the serial killer the world is only now discovering. With witnesses who'd seen Kieran Kelly garrote Edward Toll, a murder conviction looks certain.
6 months pass. Because Kelly's in prison, he comes clean. He's not drinking, he's not doing drugs.
The only trouble is that this is what the tramps tell you at the time. Wonderful, they've all made statements. But by the time it gets to court, which is 6, 7 months later, Kelly's been in prison, he's cleaned up, he's quite smart.
He's able to seem articulate and he's able to seem confident. However, the people that saw it, the homeless people that were around at the time who were struggling with alcohol and drug abuse, haven't had 6 months to get clean. So their stories seem disjointed, they've forgotten half of what they said.
And the tramps that are giving evidence against him can't remember yesterday, let alone 6 months ago. I think it's quite beautiful that he would never, ever admit the murder in the churchyard.
Would he not?
Well, he wasn't guilty, was he? The court told him he wasn't guilty.
And therefore he took what the court said.
Wasn't guilty. Oh, yeah. Kelly was guilty. Of course he was guilty.
So it's interesting. So he admits to things he hasn't done, and yet this one incident, which is one of, very similar to other things he admitted to, he decides not to because he was told. So there's something in a very almost childlike way of, well, they've said I haven't done this, but...
So I haven't. And that's Kelly, in a nutshell.
And so the case is thrown out, and he lives to kill another day.
Though Kelly was acquitted, Edward Toll is acknowledged by all who have looked at the case as a Kelly murder victim. That brings his murder count to a minimum of 3. So what is the likelihood that he killed many more times and on the London Underground? The way he murdered makes Ian Brown convinced that Kelly had struck many more times.
Kelly was spontaneous. I don't think he would ever have planned a murder. It just happened.
Just impulsive.
Oh, yeah, completely and absolutely. He didn't like him snoring, so he snuffed him. That's Kelly's version. The one sleeping on my tombstone. So he killed him. He didn't go into that part thinking, who can I murder?
No, indeed.
This guy just happened to be there and Kelly didn't like it.
And fellow vagrants just happened to be in tube stations, which can provide a safe space. Warm, plenty of people who might call the police in the event of violence. According to Kelly in his interview with Ian Brown, it was the Underground where he allegedly pushed a friend onto the tracks, his first kill.
And he said Kelly told him, "It started in 1953 when I came to London for the Queen's coronation and ended up pushing a friend of mine, Christy Smith, in front of a train at Baker Street tube station."
As researchers and detectives later probed, some evidence did appear suggesting that Kieran Kelly was someone who regularly pushed fellow vagrants that he came across onto the tracks of the London Underground.
In 1982, Kieran Kelly was arrested and charged with the attempted murder of another man called Francis Taylor at Tooting Bec tube station in London. Taylor and Kelly had been in company, had come into the station together. There'd been some kind of altercation, and Kelly had pushed Francis Taylor in front of a train that was entering the station. Now, by some kind of miracle, Taylor ended up in the well underneath the tracks, and when the train backed up, he got himself back up onto the platform, and Kelly was later picked up by the police, charged with attempted murder. But, you know, Taylor wasn't unknown to Kelly. They kind of drank together on the common, and, you know, after a few weeks, the police picked up Kelly. He was arrested for the attempted murder of Francis Taylor, but that case was acquitted. It went to the Old Bailey and nothing became of it. And then in 1982, another man who was called Gordon McMurray, who went by the nickname Jock Toland, he was pushed in front of a train by Kelly at Oval tube station. Again, bizarrely, similar circumstances to Taylor. He ended up in the well underneath the tracks and survived too. The police had a line-up. Jock Toland, aka Gordon McMurray, fingered Kelly, but, you know, after that decided that he didn't want to press charges either. So there's two definite attacks on two different tube lines, 5 years apart. 1977, a man called Francis Taylor, and then 5 years later, 1982, Gordon McMurray. Both survived, and this is one of the interesting things about the case, is the branding of Kelly as a London Underground serial killer. There's nothing on his rap sheet that shows him having murdered anyone on the Underground, but there is, you know, an attempted murder charge that he was acquitted of, and it's also on the police records that he pushed another man in front of the tube in 1982.
3 certain murders to his name, 2 convictions, and Kelly's own word that he'd killed many times by shoving vagrants onto the tracks of the London Underground. 2 recorded cases of him attempting murder in precisely that way. Just how many people did Kelly kill? And why? Kieran Kelly may have been convicted for 2 murders and been acquitted for a third he was seen to have committed, but that was just part of his confession story.
What we could prove was maybe 5, 6 murders. Everything right. Everything that Kelly said was exactly on the dot. Even down to one in Balham. But it was another tramp. And Kelly had told us that, again, he didn't like him sleeping where he was sleeping. And
it seems certain that the man was called Mickey Dunn. Irritating Kelly was not a good idea. As Dunn sat out on the common, Kelly disappeared, then returned with a bottle of something.
So he bought a bottle of white spirit, and he'd actually poured it down the guy's throat.
Another vagrant called O'Connor was drinking with Kelly and Dunn near the library at Tooting Broadway. O'Connor left to buy more cider, and on his return, he found that Kelly and Dunn had been fighting.
And then the guy had gone to Peckham, where he'd been taken into a tramp's unit, and then they transferred him to King's College Hospital, and he died, but it went down as cirrhosis of the liver. And it was, I mean, the guy died of cirrhosis of the liver, but Kelly helped him along his way by pouring stuff down his throat.
If true, and the evidence supports the claim, Mr. Dunn was yet another victim of Kieran Kelly. On the stories went. Not only was proof hard to find, there was no public pressure for charges to be brought by Ian Brown.
He admits himself that because the other confessions of murder that he made were of, tramps and homeless street drinkers, that there just wasn't the incentive from the police to go and pursue these.
With 2 convictions ensuring that Kelly was never going to be freed, the police at the time decided not to pursue other cases.
There was no great public outcry. There was no, impassioned call for, justice to be served here. It was just, they had him on 2, he was going down for 2. It wasn't worth their while to pursue anymore.
They were people that slept rough. They were people that could go missing without anybody noticing. In many cases, there were people that struggled with either mental health or substance abuse issues. And I think very sadly, they were people that many times just felt helpless. So it was a very kind of ideal situation for someone like Kelly, because he was able to engage them, to do anything that he wanted, and actually, for many years, go completely undetected.
And what of the claims that Kelly was a pusher on the London Underground?
I think he was capable of killing somebody on the London Underground. The thing about Kelly's confession, which does run into double figures, is that the people and the murders that he claimed to have committed, only one of them, Christy Smith, was on the London Underground. The other murders, you're talking about poisonings, strangulations, stabbings, beatings to death. I mean, his methodology to kill, was varied. It wasn't, or his claims, he wasn't just confined to pushing people off train platforms. He was creative in how he was, trying to kill.
Funnily enough, the last thing that he did before the murders in the cell was push another vagrant under a train at Kennington railway station. And in between, there are maybe 2 or 3 other incidences where people have gone under trains and Kelly's been around.
Right.
So there's no doubt that Kelly pushed people under a train, or that he did it a couple of times or 3 times.
Did he admit, how many did he admit to actually doing?
Well, because they didn't die, he wasn't admitting anything about pushing people under the train other than the 1953 one. But reading and checking back on his history, he'd been interviewed a number of times where vagrants had fallen under tubes, and Kelly was about.
Right.
So murder-wise, I can't think of a murder under the train that actually was completed. Whether he pushed someone under a train and they didn't die, certainly the one at Kennington, the train driver stopped. So there's one that Kelly actually admitted to.
If you're coming to his story cold, you'll see a murder and a manslaughter. William Boyd and Hector Fisher. That's 2. But down the other end, you've a claim by a former policeman who did actually get a commendation on the case, who's saying that Kieran Kelly killed up to 31 people and had confessed to killing up to 31. So the fight for the truth in the Kelly story is somewhere between those 2 figures, 2 and 31. And if Kieran Kelly's confession and his admissions are to be believed, number 1, that kind of backed up by the testimony of a detective inspector who enjoyed a stellar career and worked on some really notable cases like Ian Brown did, that they felt confident that Kieran Kelly admitted to over a dozen murders. They felt confident that they had the evidence to pursue 5, maybe 6 of those murders, and they were sure that he did 5 or 6 of those murders. I think, in the fight for the truth in the Kieran Kelly story, I think that's where I settle. I settle on the testimony of, the team of detectives who felt they had him on 5, maybe 6 murders, and they brought home a conviction on 2.
2 convictions, 1 acquittal where it seems certain he was the killer, 2 murdered vagrants who'd been with Kelly moments before they died, 2 charges of attempted murder which saw juries return not guilty verdicts, and Kelly himself claiming to have killed a further dozen vagrants. But no murders on the London Underground can be assigned definitely to Kieran Kelly. He was, nonetheless, a serial killer. Why?
So what do we know for sure? We know Kelly definitely killed and was convicted of 2 people. In fact, we know it's 3 because there was a lot of confirmation on what happened with Edward Toll, even though he wasn't convicted. That's 3 people. We also know that he admitted to crimes he couldn't have committed. We also know that people that spend a lot of time with him believe, and these are police officers, seasoned detectives, that he probably killed in the region of about 12 to 15 people. Fact of the matter is, what we know for sure is that he was a dangerous man. He never got to a point where he was able to settle whatever demons that he was fighting with. And finally, the fact of the matter is that he was a murderer. Now, why he did it? Well, that's a key question.
So there's these themes, right? There's this, he's annoying me, he's snoring, he's sleeping where I am. But then there's also these themes about, you know, he said I was gay, he tried to, you know, he wanted my bum, all these kind of. So are you at this point starting to put together a picture of who Kelly is? So if you were to get an impression at this point, how would you know, what's in your mind?
Mad. I'm not a psychologist or anything like that, and I don't know exactly what his problems were, but whatever mental problems they were, I'm sure all of them apply to Kelly. Kelly had 3 problems. 1, he hated homosexuals. 2, he hated alcoholics. 3, he hated tramps. And he was all 3.
Kieran Kelly killed those he despised most, those like himself. Homeless drunks, some of whom may or may not have been gay, whilst Kelly himself refused to admit whether or not he was gay. Suggestions that he might have killed 31 times, with many victims pushed to their deaths on tube tracks, are largely dismissed by those in authority. But those same investigators do not deny that many died at his hands, and that the demons Kelly kept hidden from those who passed him by each day mean we will probably never truly be able to get inside the mind of the serial killer that was Kieran Kelly.
I think Kieran Kelly was extremely dangerous. His audacity, his disrespect for human life, and I think the lightness with which he took his crimes, the way that he'd at the same time take pride and taunt and go back and forth, it was a game to him. And I think when life and death becomes a game, well, then you have a recipe for a very dangerous human being.
Theodore Johnson killed his first wife, but in a strange series of events, he would soon be released.
To me, it was murder as opposed to he was convicted of manslaughter.
He was set free after just 2 years on the grounds that he had been the abused rather than the abuser.
Having served his sentence, he leaves prison. He meets a new woman, Yvonne Bennett,
who he also kills, claiming this time that his mind was disturbed by the fact that she was cheating on him.
Theodore Johnson proves to us all that the crime of passion argument no longer really holds any water.
In what's thought to be a unique case, the two-time killer was released to kill again.
This particular leopard doesn't change his spot.
What went on inside the mind of the serial killer, Theodore Johnson? In 2016, Theodore Johnson ran headlong into the path of a train. He survived his latest suicide attempt, but he was badly injured. Earlier in the day, he had killed a woman called Angie Best, a mother of 4, a grandmother too. She had made, quite literally, a fatal mistake.
She wanted to stop the relationship, he didn't. And the poor lady paid with her life.
To be in a relationship with Johnson was to risk being killed. Angie Best was the 3rd female partner who had lost her life at his hands.
Any sense of stepping out of line and disrespecting him by finding another partner, by standing up for themselves, would have been met with this huge, disproportionate anger and violence.
Who was this man who could simply not take rejection without killing? Theodore Johnson spent most of his life in England living in high-rise flats in the Midlands or in London. He had swapped the culture and lifestyle of Jamaica, where he'd grown up. What else do we know about the man who would create unwanted English legal history?
Theodore Johnson is born in Jamaica, one of 11 kids, poor family, and eventually he moves over to Wolverhampton, where he starts his new life with his young wife, Yvonne.
Certainly in the beginning, it looked as if Theodore Johnson wanted to have the normal and traditional life. He wanted children, he wanted a wife, he wanted an ordinary relationship.
And they lived in a flat on the 9th floor of a block, and he had a job in a local garage, and, you know, they'd had their family life. Things were going well for them.
It was 1981, but soon it was clear it wasn't all plain sailing.
The relationship with his first wife started to break down at some point.
To some, Theodore cut a distinctive figure because of his height.
Well, he's not a big man. He's quite slight, really. Demure, subdued.
Weighs just over around 110 pounds. So in terms of his physical stature, he isn't somebody that's particularly imposing, and perhaps feels a bit vulnerable because of that.
If he felt vulnerable, small, it did not restrict him from being violent towards Yvonne. There were reports from neighbours of her being beaten. It was a different era. The police seldom intervened.
I could personally attest that. I was a police officer in the 1980s myself, and when we used to go to calls of domestic violence and domestic disturbances, there wasn't the kind of support for victims that we have now. It was a kind of, well, this is a private matter, everybody should leave it alone.
It was a Sunday, and Yvonne wanted Theodore to dress for church.
It may have been about him feeling very belittled, about his wife saying that he wasn't smart enough to understand things to attend church. We also know that the type of argument they're having escalates.
He'd attacked her with various items, including an ashtray.
Then with a vase, then with a broom.
And then the argument supposedly went out onto the balcony, and prosecution and the police would say he pushed her off. He would say it was an accidental push and she fell over.
Yvonne Johnson was just 31. Yvonne and Theodore had 2 small children. Their mother was about to be depicted as a nagging wife who'd made their father's life a misery.
In fact, he holds that up as a defense. He says to the judge that, you know what, she would make me do housework. And the judge actually refers to this when sentencing. So instead of being seen as the perpetrator, instead of Yvonne Johnson being seen as a victim, it switched around. And all of a sudden, Yvonne Johnson is this horrible, abusive spouse.
She was the violent aggressor, not him. A judge and jury was asked to believe that no man should have to put up with a woman like Yvonne.
She forces me to do housework and washing up and cooking.
He explained his motivation for killing her as a kind of spontaneous self-defense. So he came at this by saying that she was the abuser and not him.
He even uses the ferocity of his attack to support his defense.
Because he used multiple weapons and it was frenzied violence, and he tipped her over a balcony, which is a very visible thing to do. You're not going to be able to hide that you've done that. So it can appear to the rest of us that that was potentially spontaneous rage. Somebody got very angry, lost their rationality, and look what happened. I could not have predicted this was going to happen.
Therefore, he wasn't guilty of murder, he was guilty of manslaughter by reason of diminished responsibility. And that's what the court found.
It's an important distinction in English law. If a defendant can establish that his responsibility for his actions were diminished in any way, that he had been provoked, or that he'd been abused, then the charge can be reduced to manslaughter. The sentence can be reduced from life, too.
He's so good at reframing the story, about putting himself in the position of victim, that not only does the judge buy into it, but the sentence is reduced and it goes down to only 3 years.
And in fact, Theodore Johnson was released even earlier.
He was sentenced to be detained in a secure psychiatric unit.
He was designated mentally ill. If he could be treated, he would no longer be dangerous. That was what he argued. Former detective David Nichol doesn't believe that Johnson had mental issues, but the authorities at the time did.
So for him to claim provocation and, oh, I'm a poor wee victim here, no.
And after 2 years, he was found to be cured, or at least sane enough to be released back into the community. And this happened, and of course there he was, Theodore Johnson, the killer, back in the community and able to form new relationships.
By today's standards, his treatment seems bizarre. A wife killer treated leniently because he was so put upon, and free after just 24 months. It was a sign of things to come for the way that Theodore could manipulate his way out of trouble.
This is kind of a real glimpse into Theodore's state of mind, right? And we see that he's very good at rewriting the story. He's very good at manipulating facts so that they work for him. Don't forget, this person was caught red-handed. This wasn't just someone that flipped and shot a gun. He beat this woman with 3 different household objects. Then he found the strength to tip this woman over a 9th floor balcony. So, this idea that he's this tiny, fragile little man seems far-fetched now, but clearly he manages to pull the wool over everyone's eyes and say, no, it was her fault. I was the victim. Obviously, this is what happened.
Back out, the man who had killed one woman soon went looking for another. The decision to send Johnson to a high-security psychiatric unit meant the probable use of medication. But he had been seen as the victim. He would not have been counselled about being a perpetrator of domestic abuse.
So he would have come out exactly the same person, maybe a worse person, than when he went in. And given the kind of person that Theodore Johnson was, he probably would have been searching for another stable relationship almost immediately.
He had wanted to be in a settled partnership when he left Jamaica, when he first arrived in England, and now that he was in London too.
He liked that stability in his life. He even felt entitled to it. So he would have found somebody quite quickly, and he would have speeded up those romantic processes straight away so that they would feel that they were perhaps in the middle of a grand passion. If they were in love, he was the perfect man.
So having served his sentence, he leaves prison. He meets a new woman, Yvonne Bennett.
Theodore is in a new relationship with a new Yvonne, and they move to a new city, and together they have a new baby.
He pushes the relationship along as quickly as he can.
But of course, the reason for speeding it up is to get that control as soon as possible, because he needs that. He needs to have that stability. He needs to have somebody else in his life who he can control and who will focus just on him. It's very important to him.
And you might think that, this is his chance to start again. But as is sadly so often the case, he doesn't change his way of dealing with the woman in his relationship. He doesn't change the way he treats her, and that relationship too becomes abusive.
He and Yvonne stay together for another 7 years. Is that a sign that things were going smoothly? Not, according to criminologist Jane Monckton-Smith.
If nothing comes along to disrupt the relationship, if they are maintaining control, if the victim is allowing that control to continue because probably they're too scared to do otherwise, that relationship could float along for 50 years. The trigger, the provocation, which is usually separation or rejection, could come at any point. So the fact that they were together 7 years shows more about his need for that stable relationship than hers.
Neighbours later described a relationship dominated by two things: regular shouting matches and Theodore Johnson wanting to keep a close eye on his wife, to know where she was morning, noon and night.
People who are controlling, like Theodore Johnson, who are very, very controlling, their partners probably don't have time to breathe on their own without him having given permission or not.
So we know that this is probably a tumultuous, a difficult relationship, because at least on one occasion the police are called in because of a domestic dispute. So the violence is there, but then things go quiet.
But inside the flat where they lived, there was turmoil. Johnson accused Yvonne of seeing someone else. True or not, he was not one to live with doubt.
This particular leopard doesn't change his spots, and he carries on being abusive within that relationship. So much so that Yvonne calls police and says, he's been abusing me.
I think their relationship was breaking up and she wanted him out, but it's not the sort of thing we can get too involved in.
This is in an age where the police way of dealing with domestic violence wasn't as refined as it is today.
Johnson suspected an affair. A constant in his life was the willingness to self-harm or threaten suicide. Johnson would make serious attempts to kill himself on several occasions. Ironically, making threats to hurt himself was a way of protecting Johnson. It gave him the emotional upper hand, and it's what abusive, controlling people like Johnson sometimes do.
But one thing that quite often happens is threats to suicide. And this is to try and get the person who they're maybe losing to change their mind.
That was indeed the state of Johnson's mind. He would both use violence and threaten to end his own life. A controlling mechanism applied by a man who had already killed once. After she told him she intended to leave him, Johnson tried charm, bought her a box of chocolates. According to him, she rejected them.
Yvonne decides that she wants Theodore out of the house.
A very dangerous thing to do. He'd felt rejected by his first wife and killed. Would he kill again? In a North London police station, a call comes in.
1992, I was the Detective Chief Inspector in charge of the CID office at Holloway Police Station. I'm convinced it was a Sunday afternoon that the call came into the police station apparently from Theodore Johnson.
Emergency, which service?
When he himself calls the police and asks the police to go quickly to his flat because their child is on its own and he has to go and kill himself.
Was Yvonne dead at that point?
Well, he had left the flat and gone wherever he called us from. Remember, we were talking 1992, so not very many mobile phones and all that sort of thing. So I think the call came in from a call box. You need to go to that flat.
When asked where he's going to be, he explains that he's suicidal.
In a matter of minutes, police arrive. The caller had seemed distraught. They acted quickly.
There's a lady there and a child, so he was obviously concerned for the child, but knowing Theodore as we do know now, I'm afraid he intended to kill Yvonne, and he did succeed. But because he told us reasonably quickly, we got there, but couldn't save her.
Police were confronted by a tragic scene. A 2-year-old crying, her mother just yards away.
Unfortunately, that Yvonne Bennett had been strangled with a belt. Wasn't dead for very long, but unfortunately the officers couldn't save her. And the 2-year-old child was unharmed in one of the bedrooms.
Strangulation's a very intimate way to kill somebody. You have to get up close to them, you have to touch them, you can sometimes see their face, you can certainly hear them, and they will be struggling against you. So it's usually somebody that you have an emotional association with.
The reason he gives behind why he ends up killing Yvonne is the fact that she finds out that she's seeing another man, and it's at this point that he loses it. Again, there's something about this kind of hyper-masculine understanding of a certain respect he should be afforded.
There was no immediate sign of Theodore Johnson. Views differ on the motivation for what he did next.
He then, presumably struck by remorse and regret for what he's done, tries to kill himself by stringing himself up from a tree.
Just like in the case of the first murder, he's positioning himself as the victim. So he's not calling to say, I've done this, I'm the perpetrator. He's calling to say, I've done this, but actually, I'm not feeling stable. I'm feeling so bad that I'm going to go and kill myself. And in fact, the way that he chooses to try and kill himself suggests that this wasn't an actual threat at all. He tries to hang himself with string.
Some investigators have never been convinced that his suicide attempt was truly motivated by remorse.
Theodore had gone then out to Barnet somehow in a park and tried to hang himself with a piece of string. Well, string's not going to work in those respects, so he didn't manage to do that properly.
So he made big proclamations. He'd call the police and say, this is what I'm about to do. But, you know, A, he'd give people a heads up of this is what they were about to do. You know, he's going to try and kill himself. But B, his methods, you know, seem very odd. You know, no one hangs himself with string that breaks.
The suicide attempt becomes vital in the story of Theodore Johnson. Sane people, a theory went at the time, do not choose to kill themselves. At the very least, it's an indication of someone who is not of sound mind. His record showed that he had threatened suicide before even tried it. But was this behaviour part of a pattern of assuming the role of victim? The abused husband who'd killed when suffering diminished responsibility. Now the man who longed to die, remorseful because he'd killed again. The local head of CID began making inquiries about Theodore Johnson and did not expect to discover what was on his file.
Obviously we go to check people's backgrounds, their previous convictions, and as I recall, I think that was the only one he had, was previously killing his wife up in Wolverhampton. Circumstances of that one came to us again as quite a surprise that he had pushed his first wife off a 9th floor balcony. It's appeared to me from what I read about it and researched that it was a very deliberate killing.
That was a conclusion that Detective Nichol reached. The facts seemed to suggest it. So he was surprised at the outcome that he was now reading about. A verdict of manslaughter.
But to me, that was murder as opposed to he was convicted of manslaughter.
Theodore Johnson had been released just 2 years after being convicted for his first killing. Was he about to claim diminished responsibility again and so have a murder charge reduced to manslaughter? Murder brings an automatic life sentence. Manslaughter can mean a much shorter time behind bars. If Theodore could prove a mental issue had caused the second killing of a woman, maybe he would be sent to a hospital facility. His suicide attempt established that he was not sane enough to be held responsible for murder. Surely, history could not repeat itself.
So even if people were prone to understanding and couching sort of that first murder, as a spouse who'd kind of been abused for so long that he reached the end of his tether, now that really calls everything into question, right? This has happened twice. There's been reports of domestic violence, and the modus of not only how he operates around women, but how he then positions himself as victim is something that's happened almost identically twice in a row.
As difficult as it appears now to believe, Theodore Johnson did indeed argue diminished responsibility again. Was he about to avoid being found guilty of murder for a second time? In 1992, Theodore Johnson appeared before a court at the Old Bailey. He denied murdering Yvonne Bennett, his second partner, claiming he was mentally unwell at the time. Amongst the evidence he offered, his failed attempts at taking his own life.
Certainly his history of suicide attempts may have been seen more as a mental health issue than a control issue, and that actually might have supported his diminished responsibility plea.
The court accepted that his attempt at hanging himself from a tree with a string was evidence of a disturbed mind.
He was able to plead manslaughter by reason of diminished responsibility and ended up yet again being sent to a mental institution rather than to prison.
His admittance to a psychiatric unit is quite strange, but there were other things that came into the picture, like depression, and he had a history of suicide attempts, which probably made it look more like he was a man with mental illness problems.
And off he went. It was a manslaughter plea of guilty, diminished responsibility, and he was given a hospital order. Now that's a secure hospital, and in most cases, and as I say, my anticipation at that time would be he'd be in for a very long time, if not forever.
At least, for those who felt he should have been found guilty of murder, there was some consolation. It was unlikely Johnson would ever be released from a secure unit. For criminologist Jane Monckton-Smith, the verdict was a byproduct of different times. Though there's no defence of crime of passion, domestic murders are often seen in that context.
We're very, very used to using the crime of passion to rationalise these kinds of homicides. We have done for years and years and years. I mean, going back decades, we've used the crime of passion to understand domestic homicide. And what Theodore Johnson was saying was just underlining what we think we already know about this kind of killing. So it doesn't surprise me that it was successful.
Theodore Johnson, father of 3, killer of 2 partners, was locked up, very possibly never to be released. Except he was. He convinced carers he was no longer a risk.
People like Theodore Johnson, who have that type of personality disorder, will be very, very good at manipulation. Their whole life depends on it, really. They have to manipulate their victims. They have to manipulate the people around them to get what they want.
By the late 90s, Theodore Johnson was again on the outside.
We did discover, or the family contacted us some year later, I think they'd seen him in the street somewhere with an escort, allegedly some hearing to do with the daughter, the child. And what I thought, that's all right, he's got an escort, he's out for that reason and that reason only. And now I discover, all these years later, he wasn't in for much more than 2 years. 2 years for his second killing.
Out, he's allowed to temporarily leave the institution where he is to commence a course in furniture restoration, trying presumably to rehabilitate him for life in the future. This is a man who's killed 2 partners.
Members of Yvonne Bennett's family couldn't believe that they'd seen Johnson out on the streets.
Oh, absolutely, astounded, and so were we. They're ridiculous.
Ironically, those who investigated Johnson have always accepted that women he randomly meets are safe from harm. It was not they who Johnson would ever want to kill. To know him, to be intimate with him, however, was to put yourself in grave danger.
We totally accept he's no danger to the normal lady in the street. Women who are strangers to him are no danger whatsoever, I don't think. But start a relationship with him and you're in severe danger.
Sometimes, when on day release, Johnson was escorted, but not always.
But of course that also left him free to meet potential partners, and that would have been important to him.
He's allowed to leave again on unescorted visits to gain an apprenticeship around furniture restoration, and it's during one of these visits that he meets Angela Best.
Angie Best is oblivious to the danger that she's in.
When he met Angela Best, the chances that she would be killed were very, very high. That does not mean that it was inevitable that he was going to kill her, but if you look at the timeline of how these things play out, if there was something that came along, like a separation, then it would become more inevitable.
At first, the temporary arrangement between a man she would meet only by day lessened Angela's chances of coming to any harm. But if Johnson was able to convince the authorities he was now safe to be permanently released, Angela would be in grave danger if Johnson's record was anything to go by. And he was about to get lucky for a third time.
About a year after he started this course and started being released temporarily from the institution, Theodore Johnson's able to convince a mental health tribunal that he should be released permanently, and he is.
A stipulation is added to the conditions of Johnson's release. He could not start a relationship with another woman.
Where there's been a history of domestic abuse and there's been serious violence, it's not unusual for there to be licence conditions that that person has to inform the authorities when they are starting a new relationship. So it doesn't surprise me that that condition was put on Theodore Johnson.
However, a mere condition was not something that some officers felt would be a deterrent to the twice convicted killer.
Well, what can I say? What a weak condition to your release. Because, am I going to tell you? Because you'll be possibly put back in.
He wouldn't want anything to come in between him and that relationship. And if he thought that the police or the probation service were going to tell his partner about his past, that would have been a significant threat to him. He probably would have tried to hide it.
So I'm not going to tell you. And unless you start visiting at odd hours or putting surveillance units onto him, well, you don't do that. He just carried on.
In fact, he starts a 15-year-long relationship and nobody knows. Despite what was going on, he must have had some degree of charm, an ability to connect with women, to keep them engaged.
Johnson had killed 2 long-term partners. How could he justify starting a third significant relationship? Having a woman in his life is something that Johnson appears to simply have needed.
There's obviously something in his past that has destabilised him in some way. He maybe doesn't feel safe in the world, he didn't feel loved, lots of different things like that. And he feels that he can get those things through a relationship, but it's a relationship he has to own and control. So whenever he comes out of prison, the first thing he's going to do is go and seek out another partner.
And his third long-term partner, Angela Best, seemed happy enough with Theodore.
So when he's released, he actually moves in with Angela Best. So he's lying on both sides. To the authorities, he's lying and saying, no, there's no relationship with a woman, even though he's living with someone immediately.
He manages to keep his past secret from her, keep the fact of his relationship with her away from the authorities, and perhaps crucially, she, Angela Best, has no idea for 15 years that she's living with this man who's killed his last 2 partners.
He's lying to her consistently as well.
She does soon suffer the same fate as the 2 women he had killed.
So it became clear that he hadn't changed at all, really. You know, it had just taken him a little bit longer to get to the stage where openly he was abusive to Angela. But he clearly had treated her in the same way as he'd treated his other 2 partners.
In 2006, 2011, 2015 and November 2016, Theodore Johnson, in planned meetings with his probation officer, lied by denying he was in a relationship, and he was believed. In the warped world of Theodore Johnson, a woman he barely knew was safe. And when things are going well in a relationship with Johnson, a woman seems to have been safe. How would Angela Best's time with Theodore work out?
So they're in this relationship for 15 years before Angela Best actually finds out about Theodore's past.
I think it's very difficult to try to imagine what it must feel like having been involved in a committed relationship for 15 years with somebody who's got 2 such dark and terrible secrets and kept them from you.
It's at this point that she leaves.
By leaving him, she had rejected him. By discovering about his past, she was endangering him. She could report the relationship that he had with her, so exposing that he had breached the conditions of his release.
And I guess there must be a real fear in her mind as well that I've just split up with him, or I'm just trying to split up with him. And is this how it's going to end for me as well? You know, do I need to be especially careful now?
She did. Johnson only knew one way of dealing with things when relationship issues caused him to get angry. He killed. Angela Best had left Theodore Johnson. Soon after, he hears she may be in another relationship.
It's not until he finds out that she's seeing another man that he asks her to come back.
Johnson was at his most dangerous, and just before Christmas 2016, Angela was on the way to see him.
On the 16th of December 2016, Angela Best is going to help Theodore Johnson with an appointment that he has at the Jamaican Embassy.
When this kind of thing happens, the person has manipulated a situation where they are going to be alone with the person they want to kill.
Unlike the other 2 cases, which seem to happen in the moment, out of fury, in the case of Angela Best, he decides to call her back. There seems to be a sense of premeditation here. So he calls her back to his house, asking for help to fill out some forms. And she obliges. She comes back. This is someone that she's known for 15 years.
We know she leaves their former home to go to him, and that she arrives where he's staying at about 9:20 that morning. During the course of the rest of that morning, her son wants to get in touch with his mum. He's phoning up, but gets no answer. And nothing's heard from either of them until at 3:25 or thereabouts that afternoon at Cheshunt in Hertfordshire. A man throws himself under a train on the railway line. Police are called to that incident, and they find that that man is Theodore Johnson. And he's badly injured. He's lost limbs, he's in a bad way, but he's alive.
Again, he went off to commit suicide. Threw himself in front of a train, and again failed, other than causing himself severe injury. No consideration for the people on the platform, or the driver, or anything of that sort, or the medical people that have to look after him.
An attempted suicide can be a telltale Johnson sign. It can mean a woman is dead at his hands.
And so police go to the address they have for him, which is the address in Tufnell Park in North London, where he'd lived with Angela Best. When police go there, they get no answer, and they go in, fearing the worst. And indeed, they find that Angela Best has been murdered. Lying by a sofa, and she's dead.
She was hit with a hammer several times, in fact 6, I think the post-mortem report said, and strangled with a cord from a dressing gown. So there you have, between the first, second and third cases, violent hitting, strangulation. So the third one was the culmination of the first two. But I'm afraid eventually the circumstances came round. She wanted to stop the relationship, he didn't, and the poor lady paid with her life. Let down from every angle, I'm afraid.
Was the latest suicide attempt a prelude to a defence of diminished responsibility? Perhaps not. In his attempt, Johnson lost an arm and a hand. This time, his attempt at suicide seemed genuine.
Despite the fact that he survived jumping in front of the train, he probably did want to kill himself. It was after a third homicide. He must have known that he wasn't going to get away with it a third time. It may be that he wanted to maintain control of his own life and his own decisions, and it was his decision to end his life, so that's what he was going to do.
Now retired, Detective David Nichol learned about the details of the latest Johnson killing, a man he thought he had helped put away for the rest of his life.
Well, I read the headline in the newspapers and really couldn't believe it. When I read down through the article and found it was Theodore Johnson, I was, well, disappointed, to put it mildly. I wouldn't like to say how disgusted I was that he had killed for a third time, and then to discover that he had got out so quickly after the conviction on the case I dealt with.
Why had he done it? What was it that the diminutive Johnson wanted most in his life? Was it to have a female partner, or was it to dominate a female partner? A question for psychologist Linda Papadopoulos as she considers what went on inside the mind of the serial killer Theodore Johnson.
A lot of his actions speak to his need for control. So while things were going his way, it seems that it was fine. As soon as someone, came out of line, he would, it seems, resort to violence. And this was evidenced by how often he was, called the police in to kind of deal with domestic disputes. And then ultimately, the fact that time and time again, 3 partners in a row end up being killed when he feels somehow that he's been disrespected, somehow when he's lost that control.
True to form, when Theodore Johnson was accused of killing Angela Best, he refused to accept it was murder. He did indeed look as if he was attempting to get the charge downgraded to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. There was a real possibility that he would again escape a life sentence.
Theodore Johnson was charged with murdering Angela Best, and he denied it. And he denied it right up until the first day of his trial at the Old Bailey in January 2018.
He wouldn't have had any idea what he put his victims through, because he would only be seeing things from his perspective. And his narrative in court would have had no insight at all to what actually happened. Everything would have been a manipulation.
It was part of a game, one Johnson had won before. A lighter sentence for a lesser crime had been his reward. But, probably advised that he had slim chance this third time, he had a change of heart.
And decided to plead guilty to murder. So there was none of the trying to prove provocation or diminished responsibility that had happened with his previous 2 cases. This time, he just admitted straight up, yes, I killed her. And that gave the judge no option but to sentence him to life imprisonment, because the minimum sentence for murder is life imprisonment, and that's fixed by law.
Still, the Johnson cat-and-mouse game that he played with the justice system continued. The judge recommended a 26-year minimum prison term, which would have made Johnson 90 years old on release.
He, presumably on advice, appealed that length of time, and the Court of Appeal looked at it and decided, yes, it ought to be altered, but it ought to be put up. And they raised that figure to 30 years. So he will spend 30 years in prison before he can even be considered for release.
Yvonne Johnson had been thrown from the balcony of a high-rise flat after being beaten repeatedly with the nearest weapons that Theodore could find. Her sin was to ask Theodore to dress well for church.
So this was very much about ensuring that they knew who was boss, that they didn't step out of the parameters, that he felt represented this man that he needed to be in his eyes, this kind of hierarchy of who was in charge, who was in control.
Yvonne Bennett had been strangled with her belt. Her sin in the eyes of Johnson was to fail to submit to the regular beatings that she received.
I think what we're seeing here is someone that possibly felt less than, perhaps because of his size, perhaps of his experiences of being devalued or not respected by those around him.
The sin of Angela Best was to have uncovered the truth about the man who hadn't told her of the two others he'd already killed.
So that when he found someone that was in his life, he felt in order to control them, he had to subjugate them. He had to be the powerful one, to put them in line.
The three women, unwittingly, had become a unique part of recent English legal history. In his 46 years as a Met detective, David Nichol had never seen such a case. Theodore Johnson is a unique serial killer.
In the circumstances of killing, serving a sentence, killing, serving a sentence, and killing again. The last time I researched it, I think there was 60 plus cases over several decades who had killed, served a full sentence for murder, as in life sentence, come out and killed again. But nobody, and I'm afraid I rather told the relatives of Yvonne Bennett that we wouldn't expect to see him out for an awful long time. We were let down by the system all around, I'm afraid. Most people, the vast majority, having killed a second time, just get such a long sentence that they don't come out and they don't kill a third time. I think it's almost unheard of.
Theodore Johnson lost both of his hands after his latest suicide attempt and will not be released, if at all, until he is 94 years old. Police home in on a phone signal. Will they be in time to save a missing couple?
This shipping container had several padlocks, chains, really bolted shut this place. So they spent a long time cutting through all this metal to actually get into the container.
They can hear someone inside. Is it a woman who's been missing for 2 months?
What's causing the banging? So you're there on that farm to look for a body and to hear that banging. Oh my God. Are we going to find Kayla or Charlie alive?
Just a girl, just a girl. How are you, honey? This is bolt cutters.
As they free her, they want to know where her boyfriend is.
The gentleman on the line said, Mr. Carver, we found Kayla. And my first question to him was, where's my son? His response was, we haven't found him yet.
The rescue had taken place on the land of a respected real estate agent, Todd Colehap.
You might as well tattoo USA, All-American, all across his forehead. He would look like your All-American, successful, 30-something-year-old man with a good business.
But Todd Colehap was not what he seemed. He'd killed at least 7 times. Who, when, and where?
I was not meaning to hit the mom. I prefer not to shoot women if I can. I'm gonna refuse to shoot a kid.
As one of his kidnap and rape victims sat opposite him in court, she, the judge, and the jury were trying to get inside the mind of a serial killer. Like any other day when dealing with clients at his real estate firm, Todd Colehap is trying to be helpful. This conversation, though, is about kidnapping.
I still got a kidnapping charge. It ain't going nowhere.
It's a conversation about rape.
But I had her cuffed, and she wouldn't go anywhere.
And it's a conversation about murder.
So then you shot him how many times?
Shot him twice.
Okay.
In the chest.
Okay.
He dropped forward. When he dropped forward, I went around him and put another one through his spinal column.
Todd Colehap is no ordinary home salesman.
Colehap comes out of the garage, shoots Charlie Carver 3 times in the chest. He drops dead there. He ends up burying Charlie in another shallow grave.
It's a hard thing to accept that your son is gone.
What made the prisoner sitting opposite cops in Spartanburg, South Carolina, the man he was? Linda Papadopoulos has been seeking the truth about the mind of Todd Colehap. From the start, his is not an encouraging life story.
So Todd Colehap's case is really interesting because what we find is very early in childhood, a certain deviancy.
Todd Colehap, extensive history, a very unique life. He was born in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, before moving to Spartanburg with his mom. And from a very early age, court records show that he had a pretty troubling childhood.
Even as young as in the nursery school age, Todd Colehap was violent. People were afraid of this child.
Some reports will say things like, well, he was very difficult at school, he get into trouble, he had behavioral problems. And that's, I think, something that you hear about a lot of kids. What you don't hear is about young kids being involved in hurting animals, in killing them.
An early favorite pastime of Todd the infant, torturing pets.
There's records indicating that he bleached a goldfish because he wanted a gerbil, meaning like he actually poured Clorox onto a goldfish to torture and kill the goldfish.
Police agencies, detectives need to be keenly aware of the animal crimes that take place around them.
He shot pellet guns at dogs.
Anytime you have a child that is purposely and intentionally hurting an animal, whether it's a dog, a family pet, or a wild animal, anytime you see a child that can torture and maim and derive pleasure from seeing death, it's a huge red flag.
His childhood was far from settled. In fact, he was not, at first, a Colehap.
He was uprooted several times. His mom was married and remarried several times. His birth father divorced his mom at a very young age. And then when she remarried, his stepfather adopted him legally. So that's why he became Todd Colehap. He was born Todd Samsel.
As Todd Colehap, his behavior did not improve.
He punched holes in his walls, he shredded his clothing. Teachers from his early classes in school would report just pretty abnormal behavior.
What's happening here is an emerging picture of a young sociopath.
It's not as if the authorities weren't trying to do something about Todd.
He was sent to a mental institution in the hopes that they could reform him, that they could help him. Why is his brain wired this way? He was eventually released from the mental institution, and he's out. Looks like a normal teenager.
What you don't hear is about young kids being involved in aggressively destroying property that belongs to others and belongs to them. So we know that very early on, Todd Colehap is displaying many of the issues that you would see in a psychopath later on in life.
The worrying child took until he was just 11 before he was hooked on pornographic magazines. By 15, he was enacting his darkest fantasies.
There's a 14-year-old girl, and there's Todd Colehap, 15 years old. His weapon of choice this time is a firearm. He abducts this 14-year-old girl at gunpoint, brings her back to his own house, ties her up with duct tape, wraps that tape around her mouth, and she's helpless, and he sexually assaults her. He threatens her family, he threatens to kill them, and she believes him. She can see the look in his eyes. She has seen what he has done to her. She truly believes Todd is going to kill her family.
The idea that Todd is capable of such a violent act at such a young age, combined with the fact that we know about his other acts before that as a child, is really starting to build up a picture of somebody that not only can't empathize with others' pain, but actually seeks it out and is beginning also to have a complicated relationship with sex and dominance and sex and violence.
It was all there, the red flags as police call them, that Todd Colehap would one day kill. For now, he'd have to wait, because after his conviction for abduction, he was sent away for a long time.
He has to be listed as a sex offender, but he goes, as a 15-year-old child, he goes to the man jail.
Whilst inside, he begins taking courses, equipping himself to be Todd Colehap Mark II.
During that 15 years in prison, he's gotten smart. He is smart enough that he's gone to college. He's obtained knowledge. He has recreated himself. He has performed as a prisoner what society and what prison reformists would think is a model prisoner. And at age 30, he gets released once again into the world.
Once he came back to Spartanburg, he lived a seemingly very normal life. He went to school, got a degree.
He has completely changed who he was, at least on the outside. But that evil, that violent monster was still within.
After getting a job as a graphic designer, Todd is able to indulge two post-prison passions: collecting guns and motorbikes.
He had several BMWs, motorcycles, would brag often about the amount of guns and firearms and ammunition he had been collecting.
2 years after the reformed Todd Colehap was freed, something very bad happened in Spartanburg. Todd Colehap may have appeared rewired for the better since his juvenile days, but he wasn't. He was a killer.
I just remember standing there, and it was a tearful plea to the judge, but I just looked over there at him and wanted him to know, or what a great person that he took out. Charlie would have gave you the shirt off his back.
As he drove his motorbike along Interstate 85 in South Carolina, Todd Colehap was heading for Chesney, a town with a motorcycle shop.
On November 6, 2003, that date became known as one of the most notorious homicide cases in Spartanburg County. It all happened at Superbike Motorsports, which was a pretty popular motorcycle dealer and shop there in Chesney, South Carolina. And at the time, on this date, 4 people were working there. So it was Scott Ponder, who was the owner, Brian Lucas, who was the shop manager, Beverly Guy, who was Scott's mother and also the bookkeeper there, and then Chris Sherbert, who was a mechanic there. So the 4 of them were working there that day, and all 4 were executed, shot and killed right there in the store.
They knew Todd Colehap.
He's a frequent visitor there, often discusses different parts of a motorcycle and different activities, and this was his hobby. He was well known in this shop, and they liked him. However, this one time, Todd went into the shop, and they disrespected him because Todd wasn't as knowledgeable as those workers. See, Todd's persona in his conversations, he tried to portray himself to those workers inside that motorcycle shop as someone he was not. Todd revealed some things that actually stood out, and they called him out on it.
Tell me from the very beginning about Superbikes.
Got there, not everybody was there. Went and sat on a few bikes, did my usual, basically stuff for time, and doing my best to make sure that the paying customers were not there. collateral damage is not cool.
Set on a few bikes stalling for time to make sure
Customers were not there. This was during the time, as you know, that it was not busy. I chose time that was not after work, when I would have a lot of people in there. Did not want to shoot other people.
And because they called him out, Todd felt like that small little kid again. He felt angry. And that little demon inside of him that could blow up fish and destroy animals and tear them apart limb by limb came out.
He decided to take his revenge. On the day he arrived, secretly armed, Colehap did not just want to kill, but to wipe out the staff and anyone else who got in the way.
I cleared it in under 30 seconds.
You what now?
I cleared that building in under 30 seconds. You guys would have been proud. I'm sorry, but you guys would have been proud.
All 4 were executed, shot and killed right there in the store.
And in just a matter of seconds, Todd Colehap executed 4 people.
Beverly and Chris were found inside the store. Scott Ponder and Brian Lucas were both found outside the store, just outside the front door in the front parking lot.
Did anybody, as they were falling, did they look at you? Did they face you? Did they say anything to you? Was there any conversation, don't, please, whatever?
No, sir.
With any of this? I don't remember hearing any of that. I will tell you that once I was engaged.
Okay. So
it's like, at that point, it's almost like a video game. It's not a game, but it's almost like you're focused on, you've been there, sir. You know what I'm talking about.
Suspects, not Todd, were interviewed, but despite a police campaign for information, the case went cold. 9 years would pass before Todd Colehap would make his revelations about what had happened at the motorbike shop at Chesney.
I'm saying, see, I did not want to shoot.
I didn't want to shoot other customers.
Colehap may have been happy to brag about it when eventually arrested, but in 2003 he remained beyond suspicion. Indeed, he set about the complete rebranding of Todd Mark II. He wanted to become a businessman, buying and selling houses. For that, he needed a license, and he wrote a letter to the South Carolina Real Estate Commission, apparently confessing to some of his early crimes, but decidedly playing down the incident which led him to spend 15 years behind bars.
This letter, I think, is so telling. It's kind of coming clean. Yes, it was a rape, but actually, if you think about it, it's more like a lover's tiff. We got into an argument and things got out of control, and I was a kid. So you begin to see him trying to manipulate perceptions about him. And again, I think he's a master of this.
He was just 15, he said. He'd confronted his girlfriend about two-timing him. They'd gone back to his house rather than shout in the street. Yes, he had a gun, one which he'd never fired. It was his simply because he wanted to defend himself against gangs. The out-of-court plea bargain, which left him on the sex register rather than guilty of rape, that was never mentioned.
This horrible incident that we see back in his childhood, age 15, is something that, people will read the letter where he explained it and think, you know what, he was right. It was a blip, it was, awful that it happened, but look, he's been rehabilitated, he's better. But of course, that's not the case.
But it works. Todd C. Colehap, age 33, had used his powers of manipulation to gain respectability.
It's actually scarily impressive. So what we find is that he sets about reinventing himself. He gets a real estate license. He then becomes interested in flying. He gets a pilot's license. He's a successful member of the community.
And from there, we just see him really digging into his professional life. He eventually opened his own company, TKA Real Estate. He was the lead broker, and he had almost a dozen agents working under him, selling houses for him and everything.
By 2015, Todd Colehap seemed set. The real estate business had been kind to him. He was the go-to guy when it came to buying and selling homes around Spartanburg, Anderson, and Woodruff in South Carolina.
He looked like everyday an American. He looked like that person that you would want to be your neighbor. That's what makes him so scary.
Todd had bought a big house himself and a 100-acre farm. Some of his neighbours found something unnerving about him. He seemed obsessed about guns.
Some neighbors down in Woodruff, where he had that massive property, they would hear gunshots every night. Hundreds of rounds of ammunition. So they were only left wondering, you know, what's going on down there? There must be a lot of target practice if that's the case. He also spent a lot of time down there. So when he wasn't working, he was down there in the evenings at the property, just kind of doing whatever he did down there. So those were a couple of signs where I think in the public eye, you know, you'd start to wonder, you know, what is it about this guy? There's got to be more to him.
Occasionally, Todd Colehap advertised for help. On one occasion, a couple called Johnny Joe Coxey and Megan Lee Coxey turned up for an interview. This might be a nice job to supplement their income.
Many real estate agents or real estate firms, they will hire people to stage a house, get it ready for sale. Or they hire people to clean up existing homes so they can get it ready to sell. Todd advertised for a job for people to come and help him be his cleaners. So this unsuspecting couple went and met Todd at Todd's farm. This was a nice area. It was a lot of land out there.
What was there to be fearful of as they pitched up at Todd's farm? Mr. Colehap seemed such a nice guy.
From a sociological point of view, we have indicators of success, and success makes us feel safe. So if someone has a big house and a good job and a nice car, well, those aren't traits that you typically associate with a psychopathic murderer. Those are traits that make you feel safe. You know, if this person is out there and is saying, well, look, I need someone to come and help me clean the house or help with the gardening, well, you know, clearly they're successful enough. Clearly they have the right interpersonal skills. And I think it's because of this that Todd never really raises any serious alarm bells.
But Todd was still the little boy who would throw a tantrum if anyone got on the wrong side of him, and he was prepared to use extreme violence to sexually dominate and/or kill. The Coxeys were in deep trouble.
Colehap had met the Coxeys, met Megan Coxey first, and had invited them both to his property.
As they arrived at Todd's farm, something happened.
Todd claimed that Johnny pulled a knife on him.
And that's when Johnny pulled a knife out.
What did you do with his knife?
Oh, no, I don't keep that kind of crap.
You just threw it out?
Yeah, that's right.
Colehap claimed the couple, who had a criminal record, were trying to rip him off.
What did she do when Johnny pulled the knife out? What did she say?
Nothing.
So you think she was planning on the planning of this?
I think she entirely wasn't planning of it. Okay. There was no, oh shit,
yeah.
Johnny, what are you doing? There was none of that. This was, she knew he was doing that.
Mm-hmm.
They saw a guy who had a shitload of money, driving a car they can't afford, and they were going to get something.
And the events that unraveled was a complete nightmare.
So then you shot him how many times?
Shot him twice,
okay,
in the chest.
Okay.
He dropped forward. I went around him and put another one through his spinal column.
Okay, and you shot her?
Not exactly.
Not exactly. He had other plans for Megan.
He shoots and kills Johnny and takes Megan Coxey captive.
He forces her into a locked-up container that he owned.
Tied her up, left her there, while I tried to figure out what to... I didn't know what to do with it, man.
Right.
Got rid of Johnny, came back, left her there, went and got food, fed the girl.
Fed her after she tried to rob you?
Man, what are you gonna do with her? I don't want to shoot her.
Her husband dead, Megan Coxey at his mercy. Todd Colehap armed, and no stranger to killing. Megan Coxey does not have much to defend herself as she's locked in a container by Todd Colehap. She does have a lighter.
She tried to light my damn building on fire. Do you know how?
In the back of what building?
The Connex.
He holds her there for about a week. This is near Christmas of 2015.
Mostly just left her the hell alone. I didn't know what to do with her, and then she kept burning shit. I come in and all of a sudden find that she burnt her blanket and she burnt this. She's sitting next to 100,000 rounds of ammo. Love of God, please stop burning shit.
Mm-hmm.
If that thing goes off, you know what that would do to a neighborhood?
So after a short while, Megan tries to get out, and she puts up a struggle with Todd.
Mistake. Colehap knew only one way to deal with someone putting up a fight. He shot Megan in the head, and it's likely she died instantly.
At that point, he had killed Johnny and Megan Coxey, both of which their bodies were found buried in shallow graves on his property.
The couple were reported missing, but weeks of appeals yielded nothing. Todd Colehap carried on with his business, using Facebook to sell houses, LinkedIn to boast of his success.
While the people that know him face to face, for all intents and purposes, see him as perfectly respectful, his social media site starts to display something that you don't see when you meet him.
If the front behind which Todd Colehap hid the fact that he was still a torturer, a murderer, had worked to allow him to kill and most probably rape again, what was stopping him doing it all over again?
We know that he's already kidnapped and killed one couple, Johnny and Megan. And he's done this by putting out an ad and saying, look, I need someone to come and help me take care of the house. I need a cleaner, I need someone out in the garden. And he does this, gets away with it, so he decides to do it again. And Kayla Brown and Charlie Carver respond to the ad in the paper. And that's what the beginning of the end is for Todd Colehap.
It was the beginning of the end for a young man called Charlie Carver.
Charlie was a good kid growing up. Wanted to go out, make an honest living, honest day's pay.
One weekend, Charlie met a young lady. The relationship blossomed. Her name was Kayla Brown.
Charlie and Kayla, they met through Kayla's mom, became friends, and just kind of stayed friends, for a year or so. And Kayla was, there, and they were basically just friends. And then eventually, I guess it led to them dating.
On a hot summer's weekend afternoon, Charlie brought Kayla back to meet his dad.
I really didn't meet Kayla until the Saturday before they went missing on August the 31st. That was the first time I met Kayla. And when I talked to Charlie's mom, I'd asked her how long had they been going out, and she said she had only met Kayla once. So, we got to talking, and, they'd probably only been dating just a couple of months.
Missing. The couple had gone missing. Nobody saw or heard from the couple for 5 days. What had happened to them?
Texted him, called him for days. And then on that Sunday, his mom went ahead and filed a police report and reported him missing.
And Charlie's own mother filed a missing persons report. And in that report and in the conversation, it was known that they were going to meet somebody about a job.
They'd set off for the job on August 31st.
Colehap asked Kayla and her boyfriend Charlie to come to the property in Woodruff to help clean. This was primarily to help him clean up the land there outside. He wanted them to make some paths for him and clean up some pathways for him.
On arrival, Colehap set about his work.
Unfortunately for Charlie, he was killed probably in those first few hours.
The way that Todd operates really gives some insight into how au fait he was with control and manipulation. The first thing he does after kidnapping these couples is to shoot well, the strongest party, right, is to shoot the other man. And I think this accomplishes two things. I think on the one hand, he has less of a challenge there, someone who he doesn't outweigh by 50 pounds and doesn't, outrank by, 5 or 6 inches. But the other thing that it does is he ensures that he tells the women he's not playing around. So they better feel intimidated, they better feel scared, and most importantly, they better not challenge him.
Kayla is at his mercy. As he had with Megan, he throws her into his container. Somewhere nearby, her phone is left discarded. It becomes vital in what's to happen next.
Kayla had a cell phone. As a detective, one of the first things you would do in this kind of case is order the cell phone records. Now, one would think that you would be able to declare an emergency. There were really no signs that an emergency was happening at this point, so you're having to rely on court orders, warrants, or subpoenas. Telephone companies can take as much as 6 to 8 weeks before you get those records back.
In the 9 weeks which followed the disappearance of Kayla, all hell would be brought to her life. Colehap buried Charlie's body, showed Kayla where, the better to control her. Meanwhile, the police and the families of the couple were desperately searching for them.
For at least the first 30 days, we would just cover roads, rural roads, looking for a car that was wrecked off the side of the road. Park on the road, go down an embankment, do anything that looked out of place. Our car could be hid up under, if it went underneath brush or whatever. Charlie's mom and her husband, they did the same thing that we were doing. So we cover more roads around the county. Because, at that time, that's what we thought had happened.
They were not to know that Charlie was dead, or the chilling ordeal that Kayla was being put through. She'd been chained in his container, forced to become the sex slave of Todd Colehap.
There were some things inside that shipping container, little bed area, boxes, some things for storage, a lot of ammunition and firearms, but he chains her up in there.
When you look at the way that he acted, it's truly chilling. Every day, he would go home around the same time, around 4 o'clock, take out Kayla Brown from the container, take her into the house, rape her, then put her back and go on with his day, and repeat the same thing over and over again. So there's a ritualism around it.
Todd used fear with Kayla, not only physical torture, but mental torture, describing how he was good at taking life, good at killing people. That would keep the fear factor. Can you imagine being chained up and the person holding you hostage is telling you how much they enjoy killing and how good they are at killing people?
There's probably this almost obsessive element around it, right? So kind of this comfort in scratching this itch, this comfort in having this release. Indeed, there must have been a serious high gotten, not just of the sexual gratification, but of the ability to impose your will, to subjugate somebody to that extent. And if we think back to those early days when he was just a child and acting on animals the way that he was acting on human beings, you can see almost how this escalated.
After some weeks, the phone company was able to supply detectives with the data from Kayla's phone.
Using Kayla's phone number, the detectives are able to what's called pinging, look at the cell phone towers. And it basically is a triangulation. And they know that somewhere within a 3-mile radius of the last cell phone tower that Kayla's phone hit will be Kayla's phone. And so they start the search. And where they start is the closest area near this cell phone tower.
And it narrowed their search down to that area in Woodruff where Colehap had purchased and was developing that 96-acre property. Quickly, they traced the property back to the owner, who was Colehap at the time. So that leads us to November 3rd, 2016. On this day, there's a team of law enforcement officers who go to the property in Woodruff where Kayla Brown was being held captive.
Kayla had no idea anyone was searching for her. She could simply hope and pray. Colehap had murdered her boyfriend in front of her, showed her where he was buried, and then where he had buried Johnny and Megan Coxey. Kayla expected to be killed, not rescued. Detectives expected the same fate. They arrived at the site where the phone ping had led them, Todd Colehap's farm.
I would expect to find a dead body, because my training has told me on typical abductions and kidnappings, if you don't find them in the first 48 to 72 hours, the more time that goes on, the higher probability that they're dead. And in any case, most abductions, people are killed in the first 6 hours if it's going to be an abduction where a death is going to occur. So my heart would be racing.
What would detectives find inside the container on the farm of Todd Colehap? This is the moment Kayla Brown was rescued. Detectives' hopes were raised as they battled to get inside because of what was not there.
So as those doors are ripped open, what would stand out? No smell. It's a farm, a small shed with no smell, and you have the banging. What's causing the banging? So when you're thinking you're there on that farm to find a body, to hear that banging, oh my God, are we going to find Kayla or Charlie alive?
Just a girl. Just a girl. Just a girl. How are you, honey? This is bolt cutters. This is our investigator. He's a paramedic. Oh yeah. Okay, we're gonna get you out of there. Okay.
Kayla is indeed alive. She has a chain, like a dog chain, a thick chain wrapped around her neck. She can't really move too long, and the detectives and the police are able to rescue her. What is discovered shortly thereafter, unfortunately, Charlie was murdered.
Do you know where your buddy is?
Charlie?
Yes.
He shot him.
He shot him?
Who
did? Douche.
Todd Colehap shot Charlie Carver 3 times in the chest, wrapped him in a blue tarp, put him in the bucket of the tractor, locked me down here, and I never seen him again.
Charlie was murdered that very first day. You see, Todd didn't need Charlie. He wanted Kayla. He made Kayla her chained up sex slave. He did to Kayla anything and everything that he wanted to do. He gained pleasure from torturing her as well as doing other horrible, horrendous acts that one can't even think of.
We're gonna step you out, sweet.
Charlie Carver had been shot almost immediately he arrived at the property. A detective called his father.
The gentleman on the line told me, he said, Mr. Carver, we need to talk. We found Kayla. And I just remember thinking, wow. You know, I mean, because at that point, my first question to him was, where's my son? And his response was, we haven't found him yet.
Kayla led police to a shallow grave, that of Charlie Carver.
Just didn't seem real. The whole conversation, you're thinking, no, it can't be. You get to that point, you're denying it, you know. You got to show me, you got to prove to me that you know without a doubt that it's him. You know, and they were going off of a couple of tattoos that he had and things of that nature. That's how they identified him. It's a hard thing to accept that your son is gone.
Based on the information.
Todd Colehap was not on the farm. Detectives notify a second team that had tracked down where he might be, at his home.
After they find Kayla, they alert the other team that is with Colehap in his house, questioning him about Kayla's disappearance and their connection with him hiring her to help with the houses. At that point, they communicate with each other saying, we found Kayla, and the investigators with Colehap ultimately arrest him there.
We have Kayla. We have Kayla in your property. She was locked in a container, okay? She has told us that you shot and killed Charlie. Then go ahead and put him in the back of your car. Sir.
His arrest had put an end to the killing, but the grieving for victims' relatives was only just beginning.
We went into the bond hearing, you know, they sat us down, told us don't make eye contact. You can't say anything, you can't do anything. They walk him in, and the only thing between me and him was a row of chairs. And I'm thinking, what can I do, or how quick can I jump over this row of chairs, and how long before they pull me off of him? You know, that was my first initial reaction.
Colehap is confronted by detectives in an interview room. For hours, he'd refused to talk, but suddenly he changed his mind and reveals where other bodies are buried, those of Johnny and Megan Coxey.
Todd leads the detectives right then to another couple that came onto his property seeking a job that Todd had reached out to, and he did the exact same with them. The man was discarded quickly. The woman was kept around until eventually she wasn't needed anymore.
I told her I wasn't going to touch her, wasn't going to rape her, wasn't going to do her. Just calm the hell down and let me sort this shit out.
But more astounding revelations were still to come.
Eventually, he sits down with investigators and confesses to being the shooter responsible for that quadruple homicide at the motorcycle store in Chesney.
Todd starts telling them about the bike shop, that he's the one responsible for the slayings of the 4 people. As a detective, that would be one of your life bonuses in a career. Probably the detectives were shocked, blown away that Todd would admit and confess to that crime, which is so different than the crimes that took place on his property. So what kind of person were we dealing with?
He had not even been a suspect in the Chesney slaughter.
So now he's looking at 7 bodies to his name.
It's under interrogation that Todd Colehap confesses. He confesses to the murder of Johnny and Megan Coxey. He confesses to the murder of Charlie Carver. And he confesses to something nobody even linked him with in any way, which was the quadruple homicide committed years earlier.
At that time, all 3, manager, owner, and the mom, they were in the back and were coming this way to figure out what had happened.
Why the confession? He is showing who's in charge, dominating.
He's caught, and he wants you to know that he was much better at this, that he duped you for years, that he was able to kill not 1 person, but he's responsible for the murder of 7 people.
Todd is confessing to crimes because he's getting a thrill at watching the detectives learn from him. He wants to show that he's good at something. He's the expert at killing, and he got away with it. And the cops are inquiring why, how, and they become the students. And Todd gets that thrill out of teaching and educating the cops just how he got away with the crimes he got away with.
All of a sudden, I had 3 people in front of me. I dropped the nearest. Mom was the closest, and I shot her 2 to 3 times in the chest.
He wants the police to know this. And I think the reason he wants them to know this is because this feeds into the true thing that he values about his identity. And I think that's being able to manipulate and hide and conceal, and to be better at that than your average sociopath.
Did a tactical reload and dropped the other one. That was a very fast reload.
Todd Colehap's childhood was pockmarked with instability and littered with wrongdoing, but the man he became was stable enough to rebuild his life whilst in prison, taking a degree. He went 12 years without committing a crime, evidence that he knew right from wrong, and enough for Charles Carver never to forgive him for taking away his son.
Charlie would have gave you the shirt off his back. He would have gave you his last few dollars, whatever he had, if you needed it. And for him to take him out the way he did was terrible. There's right and wrong, and everybody knows what's right and everybody knows what's wrong. You choose to do what you do.
Colehap pleaded guilty to the murders that he had boasted of. His confession and cooperation with the police became part of a plea bargain. There would be no death sentence. He was given in 2017 7 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. In 2018, Kayla Brown initiated proceedings against him in a civil court, bringing the couple together in the same room for the first time since Kayla had been chained and tortured by him. She and others are seeking damages from Colehap.